Peace and power, everyone. This is Yuya, and we are now coming into the realm of Thunderground Thursday on Enlightenment and Transformation. For this segment, I will be continuing our discussion on how to write a book. So we are dealing with how to write a book, part 2, and I will be giving some of my personal hints and tips on how to get that done. All right, so stay tuned and keep your pencils and pens handy. Here we go.
Action speaks louder than words. Action speaks louder than words. Action speaks louder than words. Action, action, action. Action speaks louder than words. Action, action, action. Time for some action. Time for some action. Time for some action. Come on. Time for some action. 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 Let's get it. I get physical. 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 I get physical, very physical.
Thunderground Thursday, of course, on our Enlightenment and Transformation Network. And as always, for now, I am Yuya, bringing to you today's topic, which is one that I promised some time ago. But, you know, I lead with spirit. So even though I may say something, sometimes I have to do those external checks and come back. And after I do my check, I find out, oh, no, I should have said this. And I have no problem with exercising the right to change my mind and change course and change direction. So fortunately, because of that, we will be covering our How to Write a Book part 2. Okay. If any of you remember, some strongs ago, I spoke about it. And when I did the segment, I think we might have went over that segment. And I said, you know what? Next time I present this, well, I said I actually would do a part 2 of it. So here we are with that part 2, which I am more than happy to bring to you all for enlightenment and transformation. All right. So let's get into it. And before we get into it, I just want to give you a quick recap of what we discussed in the last one, which I think was really more just me sharing some of my own personal methods and tools that I've employed over the years in order to get my work done. And we're in a time in the day now where certain things that seem so distant to the average person are now easily accessible. You know, so one of the things when it comes to that we're speaking of was always the ability to write a book. That was always a very big deal. You know, not just to write a book, because that's a process within itself, but even to publish that book was a very big deal. And now we're in the realm of independence. You know, there's so many different innovations that have kicked off, technological innovations that has allowed the quote unquote average person to accomplish the job that it would take a team of people to do many years ago. Well, maybe not even that many years ago, you know. And just so you all know, this is a live show that I'm doing this time. I know I usually don't do Thunderground Thursdays live, but I decided that when I have the time and the opportunity to present these shows at their given time, I won't do pre-records, but I'll actually do them live, which of course gives people an opportunity to call in with questions or comments or whatever it is that they need to call in with. So, you know, feel free. What's the calling? Calling number is 347-945-7680. Again, 347-945-7680. And if you want to call in, just call in and hit the number 1. I know it's pretty bad. I don't have the call-in number memorized, but, I don't do my shows live as much. So, sometimes I forget. But anyway, so yeah, what we're really doing is we're recapping, where we were first. Let's start there. So last time, because it's been like maybe too strong since we did it. The last one we were talking about writing your own book, and I was sharing some of maybe the unorthodox methods that I've employed to get books done. And my writing process, I should also add, is pretty quick actually. I can knock out a book in a couple of days, maybe 2-3 days. Partly because I keep the books so that they can be read in 2-3 days. I try to keep them in that space, though I have some other books that I'm working on that are, I think may take personal longer. They're a little bit more complicated, and they're series. So those are something I'm kind of working on. But when I'm dealing with any level of self-help or personal growth and development, I always try to give people something that they can walk away with immediately. You may not get the full story. You may not get all of the help that's being presented to you right away, but you will certainly be able to walk away, within an hour or two and have something that you can utilize for your life. So I've taken the same approach when it comes to writing books. And I have certainly taken the same approach when it comes to lectures and even these radio shows that I do. There's always some kind of call to action at the end, or even throughout. There's a call to action, which is really the whole theme of these Thunderground Thursdays. So now the call to action, just so if anyone is unclear, is to write a book, which has been put forth as a requirement to some of the people who I've worked with. When you've gotten consecrations from me or different work, I usually give you a 1-year assignment after your 1-month assignment. Okay. And for some it has been to write a book, not everyone. But it's really not that difficult, especially because though we live in a time now where people don't seem to be as grammatically adept, and I think that's, again, a product of the technology. People don't really sit down and craft letters anymore unless they're like breakup letters, but really sit down and put the thought into sending someone a letter. I used to be, there's probably people listening, I have young listeners who couldn't really imagine that process. But there was a time when you would sit down with maybe a pen and paper, and you would actually really think about what you want to say. And you might even have scrap paper. So you'd write it, cross things out, change them as you need to, and then you'd write it again on another piece of paper, and that would be the final copy of it. And then you'd go through a whole process of putting it in an envelope, folding it perfectly, putting a stamp on it, and then sending it to someone. There was a lot of energy that went into sending someone a written transmission. I know for some of my young listeners that's foreign to you, but that's just the changing times. That's all. Just because it's foreign doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means things have changed a bit, so, unfortunately, because of the really short term and, impulsive communication methods that we've really, just totally invested in nowadays, we don't really have the same sense of devotion, endurance, and work when it comes to communicating with each other. The problem with that, which is kind of sad, is that people have really lost their social skills. I've noticed that, people, you'll find them, sometimes you go out to eat, and if you look, people will be sitting on a date and they're both in their phones, typing and sending messages, as opposed to speaking to one another. They may be sending messages to each other, not really knowing how to verbalize anymore. Even writing by hand has become somewhat of a lost art for many people. And again, this is no rant or anything like that. It is what it is. Things are going to change. The times change, and you can evolve past the times. You can change with the times, or you can stay locked in an era. The beauty of humanity is that we have a choice. We're not like certain animals and organisms that are forced to evolve. Your evolution is a choice. Your actualization is a choice. At least your conscious actualization. Now, your mutations, that's usually imposed upon you. And sometimes we look at our mutations as adaptations, but it's not really so. So, really getting into this idea of writing a book, right? If you look at the amount of energy that some people put even into their social media posts, if you really can count their history of posts and things like that, people go and they find pictures. Sometimes they'll even edit the pictures and they'll put posts up, and it'll be like a whole series of thoughts and ideas. In many senses, they've written a whole book right there. I think one of the challenges with social media is that it takes your great ideas from you when you really look at it. Because when you have a witty notion or a profound insight or profound thought and idea, a lot of times your first inclination is to put it on a social media site. Okay. So what happens is that now you're flushing out all of your good material, basically. So when it comes down to now writing something, number one, you're out of sorts because you're used to writing for immediate gratification. I'm used to writing or putting up a post or a status or whatever so that I can get a bunch of resends / retweets or likes or comments on what I'm saying immediately. But the whole thought and idea of investing yourself into an idea or a methodology and scribing that methodology and then putting it out for the world without getting any kind of immediate feedback can certainly be scary. It can certainly be scary if that's what you're aiming for. If you're aiming for likes and immediate feedback. But either way, if you're putting out some good information and you have some good ideas and you really, I know people who have turned Facebook into their ministry, and again, no knock there. That's just what they do. So if you think about it, because we live in such a high consumption society, you may be putting some really good information because that's become your ministry. So you may be really putting some good information on your wall or wherever, whatever you're working from. And the problem is because we live in such a high consumption society, once that ticker goes down or the next day comes or whatever, people are not thinking about what you just said. And you may have put your heart and soul into what you wrote. I actually had a fellow Babalawo once say that to me. He had questioned my activity. He said, he said, what are you really doing? What's your thing? He said, because, I'm putting in the work. I'm out here putting the work in. He said, my Facebook wall reflects that. And it took me a moment to kind of adjust to the conversation because I never considered that putting work in. Again, no knock, because we're in a new day and time. And maybe that just shows some of where I'm at or not at, really, more specifically. But that was kind of his determinant on if a person is spiritually active in the community, and that was his determinant for himself. So I'm not against that. But for me, as I've said before, for those of you who have wonderful ideas and you're giving great direction and guidance to the world, you have to remember that the game is to be sold and not told. Because when you give it away for free, people very, very rarely utilize it in their lives. Just like these shows I do. The truth is, if you just went through the Foundational Friday shows, our newest Safo shows, the Mastermind Mondays, the Thunderground Thursdays, you probably got a good 5 years worth of study just in these shows, if not longer. You got a good 5 years if you really took the shows and dissected everything that was there and really tried to learn everything that was being said, utilize the things that are presented to you. You got a good amount of information there to really turn your life around. But A lot of people don't approach them in that way. And one of the reasons they don't approach them in that way is because they're free. If I presented 15 seconds of each of my shows and then said, it's pay per listen, it'd be a totally different story. But, that is where we're at. And I bring that up also to speak about where we are with the presentation of our works in this day and time. I've spoken to other authors, and one of the challenges that I've noticed some people have is with giving things away. Yes, the game is to be sold and not told, but there still is a methodology that we have to employ in order to get the word out. And because we're in such a high consumption society, you have to give a lot of things away. So I'm telling that as advice to not just authors, but anyone who has something that they're trying to sell. The truth is, a person can go on YouTube and get anything. That is what it is. You can go on YouTube and get anything. You can figure out how to do eye surgery, probably on YouTube. I bet that's up there. So you have to first show people why whatever it is that you're presenting has the value that you're placing on it. And that may mean that, especially those who want to write books, that you're going to put a lot of writing out, a lot of information to let people know that you have something to say, or to get people used to your perspective. Okay. If you take, for instance, my shows, I've probably got about 10 books worth of material just in the shows. I've thought about that before. Heck, what if I took each show and just transcribed it into a book? I think there's like 200 shows almost now, something like that. But as I also say, when you're doing this work, if you want to get, you got to give. So I like to give because when I give, it puts me in the seat of the masters. And what I mean by masters, not just masters in knowing things, masters in knowledge, wisdom, and information, but those spiritual masters, those entities, those guardians who you call upon, who give you information freely when you divine and you tap into and you try to speak to them. So I like being in their realm sometimes by taking on the role of the giver and not always being the taker. And for your work to be a success, you have to learn how to give. You have to give, and you have to really learn how to listen, which even though it seems like you're receiving, listening can be a form of giving, as I spoke about recently in a segment. Giving people that time and that energy in those moments. Listening is very important, especially for writing. One of the methods that I had shared that I utilize is I try not to write on big screens, like big computer screens or big laptop screens. I think, in fact, there's an image of me somewhere on the internet that someone took. It was a candid shot where I was writing some material. I was working on our new spiritual training phase 2. But then I was doing something. I think I was writing another book that I'm working on, and they snapped the shot. And I think the caption says something like, Haru is working on the next phase or whatever. And I was in a notepad and I was smiling to myself, But sometimes even a large piece of paper I won't hold in front of myself, because that big blank screen or that big blank piece of paper begging for words to be placed upon it, and words that you will read back to yourself and go, wow, amazing. Sometimes that within itself can be very daunting. So I try to write using utensils where I don't really see what I'm writing. This is one of the beauties of the old time typewriter, where you saw as you typed, but you didn't really focus on the screen much because, not really the screen, the piece of paper, because the view screen was so small. To really look at what you wrote, you had to lift up the paper and see what you had so far. But what this allowed is for your other senses, like when they say, when you lose one sense, your other sense is sharpened. I'm a firm acknowledger of that. So when I write often, I write on small devices like old cell phones that have pull-out keyboards. Or anything that you can type fast on. Certainly, I make mistakes. I don't have tiny hands, so sometimes those small keyboards, I make a certain amount of mistakes on them, but it doesn't matter as long as the intent and feeling is there, and I understand what I meant to say and what word this was supposed to be, word that was supposed to be. Then I can flow. And a lot of times, I know sometimes we're instructed that when it comes time to write, find yourself in a nice, quiet environment to get your thoughts out. Sometimes that works, but I find that I do better in noisy environments, because it may be a certain level of ear hustling that I can do that will help me to expound upon my ideas. So I may take my little phone and go into a park, or I've written a lot on a train before. All different kind of places where there's energy swirling around you and vibrancy. And what this does is this helps you to get into the moment. One of the methods that I shared in the last segment was how I'll use instrumental. I'll use music. And what I do is I'll just pick a topic that I want to speak about, and I'll just start speaking over the music, because the music is really pricking and tingling different thought patterns in my head as I'm listening to it. And when I take that idea, I'll just start flowing mentally, and I kind of flush out everything that I want to say about a topic, or everything that I think I can say. Now, one of the things you want to keep in mind and I'm really going to say that this is not just about writing a book, but it's also about formulating your ideas for your workshops and your seminars as well, or any presentation you want to do, even as a teacher for your lesson plans. It's very helpful. When you're writing a book, you always want to write it, for me, because of the work I do, but I would advise it for you as well. I always write with the mindset of, okay, how would I teach this? So I make sure that I use language in the book that is of my own and is of my own natural flow and cadence. Okay, it's not difficult for you to sit there at a big computer screen and come up with a really smart way to say something really simple. I mean, it's not difficult at all. To come up with a really simple way to say something smart is difficult. But if you consider the work that you do, that I'll have to explain this, even if I'm writing a fictional work, which I actually enjoy a lot more, creative writing. But even if I'm writing a creative piece, I'm still thinking about, if I was interviewed about this piece or asked a question, how would I dissect it? So can I write it in a form and in a way so that way when I start to dissect it, it makes sense? And what you'll find when you do that, coupled with a verbal flow, this takes us back to the shows I did recently on affirmations. Okay. And it's remember the mind, the visualizations that go before the actual affirmation that creates a more empowered state. So the same thing with the book. If you can visualize what it is that you're writing, then what happens is now your writing becomes a lot more understandable and simpler. Like I gave the example when I was in the studio that time, and the epiphany came to me that the songs that are hits are the ones that people can memorize, the ones that people can hum along with. Those are the ones that will be hits. It's not so much about the profundity of the melodies and the harmonies that you infuse, or the profundity of the lyricism that you use in your writing and the wordsmithing. It's not so much about that. It's about your ability to get to people quickly, to get them to the core of what you're trying to say or want to say quickly. And even if it's a simple message, it can be a simple labyrinth. So an individual can think that they're reading something simple, just like you take any of my books. You can read them in a day. You think you're getting something simple until you think about it, or you go back and you say, oh, wait a minute. No, wait. So my works tend to be a labyrinth of other thoughts, of alien thoughts at that. So because I have an alien brain, it allows them to be longer standing, as opposed to if I was just streaming or striving for profundity, but still keeping it simple, but striving for profundity, then people, once they dig through the muck and mire of all the complicated words and thoughts and ideas that are just complex for no reason, then they're done with it. It's like a Rubik's Cube or any type of puzzle that they have to figure out. It just becomes a puzzle. They figure it out and they go, oh, okay, that's what he was saying. No big deal. Okay. So to really have some longevity in your work, you have to really be able to listen and visualize. Let me give you another music example of something that happened years ago. I was playing in a group, and we had a guest player. I was playing the bass, and there was these two guys. I'm trying to remember the guy's last name, Bobby something, but he was a very well-known drummer at the time for at that time, the different TV stations that we had, they would have their own bands. And, you know, of course, if you go on like David Letterman or whatever, you can see Questlove is there, and they have a live band. And that's even like Arsenio back in the day, or even Arsenio up to recent, would have live bands. And that's like a kind of a novelty. But years ago, the actual studios themselves would have bands, and these are the bands that would play not only over the PSAs, but commercials and anything. Even if you had a show, you would have a band playing behind you on the show, and they would do the scores for everything. So he was a big time guy, studio musician for CBS. Can't remember his name right now, Bobby. I just remember he was albino, so that's for whatever that means. But he was playing, and we also had a vibe player by the name of Jay Hogarth. If any of you are jazz listeners, you know Jay Hogarth is pretty well-known vibraphone player. So we were doing a cut by the name of Chameleon by Herbie Hancock. And for this particular song, I was going to do a solo, bass solo. And I knew that Bobby and Jay were going to come and play on this number. So, you know, of course I wanted to do something special. You know, because I love the song Chameleon. Everybody knows the bass lines, like one of the funkiest bass lines in the world. So I already was going to be out front because I had the hottest part of the whole song is the bass. But then I was like, nah, I really got to do something to wow them. So, I'm working out this solo for maybe like a week and a half, and I'm not really impressing myself. And I'm saying, no, that's not it. That ain't it. I'm trying to think of which direction do I want to go. Do I want to just take it real funky, or do I want to really get deep and start going through my scales and my modes and I always was really good at Spanish style playing and go that direction. What do I want to do? I couldn't really figure it out, but I knew I felt I needed to impress these two gentlemen. So I was talking to someone, and he gave me some advice. He's a trumpet player. And I was like, man, I need some help with this solo. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, well, what I do, and he said, I hum out my solos first. He said, and then once you hum it out, all you have to do is then just transcribe whatever you just hummed. And I know it may seem simple to those of you who are listening, but remember, we're talking about writing a book and seminars and things like that. And it was very profound because same method I use to this day. You know, everything is everything, as I always tell you guys. So things translate into other areas. So as you know, the bass line for Chameleon is doom, 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 boom, 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 right? Everybody knows, sound familiar. So anyway, I'm humming that in my head. I'm walking, and I said, okay, so now I'm feeling the groove. And then I started humming just what I would do as a solo, right? Because the thing is, if you can visualize the whole project in your head, we're still talking about a book and a seminar. If you sit down with your tools and you focus on the tools, if I sit down with my laptop, or if I sit down with my bass or my drum set or my guitar, my piano, whatever, and I focus on what they can do, I'm going to get too complicated. I'm going to go too complicated with it because I'm focusing on the how intimidated. I'm looking at this bass with this long neck, and I'm thinking, man, whatever I do, I got to utilize every string, every fret, every note to make this amazing. Sometimes even if I'm looking at my piano, I'll say the same, man, I got to go up and down this thing to make it amazing. And that's the intimidation that the tool will give you. So the same thing with the laptop or with the big computer screen. You have it in front of you and you're saying, man, I got to fill this thing up with amazing words. I got to fill it up. Okay. As opposed to closing your eyes and saying, what do I feel? What do I feel? So just like when I was doing that song, I had to do the solo. I had to close my eyes and say, what do I feel? Doom, 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 boom, boom, doom, 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 doom. And I'm listening. I'm saying, now where I want to go? Now already I know how I'm bobbing my head. I know how the audience is going to be rocking their head. I already know. I don't really want them to lose that. I don't want them to lose that feeling, because I may do something that's amazing on my bass, but at the same time, I may lose the feeling of the song because I'm not holding down my position. So what's more important here? For me to focus on the overall composition and production of the wall of sound that's coming to the listener's ear, or should I make how good I am a priority? When at the end of the day, the bass is a background instrument. Nobody ever really walks away from a concert and say, man, that bass player was rocking. So, and that's something you have to keep in the back of your mind. I love the bass, and I still do, my first and my main instrument, because I like being in the background. I like holding down the spinal column. I don't want to be in front with the guitars and the horns and everything. I'm not interested in that. I like the background. I like the shadow. So by the time I was done, I came up with a solo that basically held down the groove, but at the same time allowed me to say what I needed to say about the song. It was a great solo. Everybody went crazy. Jay was like, man, that was amazing. Bobby was amazing. Gave me his cards, like, we need to do some work together. Everything happened the way I needed to happen. But that was only because I did the visualizations first. The visualization is akin to the humming. Okay, you got to go by what you feel. Forget the tools, because your first instrument is you. The best instrument that you have, the best tool in your arsenal is your own head. So the same thing stands for when you're writing a book. The best tool you have is not your thesaurus, it's not spellchecker.net or whoever you're plagiarizing, or the mounds and mounds of research notes that you have. That is not your best tool. Your best tool is your propensity to visualize. Now, don't forget who's talking here. This is me now. So we're talking about writing a book, but you obviously know I'm also talking about spiritual matters as well. All right, but that's not what Thunderground Thursdays deals with too much. But I gotta mention it for a moment. So the same thing goes for your spiritual rituals. Your greatest tool is not your spiritual tradition. Oh man, I'm dealing with the Palo because I need something stronger. Or I'm gonna deal with the Santeria because I'm gonna deal with this. Or this Lukumi ritual is gonna work. Or this Gnostic, or this Thelemic ritual, or this. Forget. You got to get out of that thinking. Those are just the tools, okay? And they can intimidate you. Because if you focus on those tools of the various traditions and all the ingredients that this one says you need to have and this one says you need to have, then you'll end up doing something that nothing in you feels. Nothing in you feels. Okay? So you want to focus on the visualization first, and the visualization will speak to something in a very primal way for you yourself. We all have something we need to say and we want to say. This is one of the reasons why instruments like the saxophone and the clarinet are so interesting to the listener. They're so interesting because the saxophone especially resembles the human voice closer to any other instrument. So it has that same simplicity. You can't hold chords on it, things like that. It has that same simplicity of a human voice. The harmonica is no different. But I mean, most people are not Stevie Wonder on a harmonica. I mean, I've never heard anyone could play he plays a harmonica like he's playing a classical guitar. You know, the type of things he can do on it. I just don't know how. But again, it's that simplicity of using your main instrument. Now that goes for your spiritual rituals, that goes for your seminars, that goes for when you're writing your books. You want to simplify things, but you want to use your instrument first. Then you can start looking at the tools you want to use. So for me, I can type all of my books on a phone because I want the simplest, lowest common denominator instrument that I can find. Okay. Now you might say, well, then I can use pen and paper. Certainly you can. If that works well for you, you can. The only reason I like to use a phone is because it's small and I can go anywhere. And I might lose the pen might not write, the pencil point might break. And now I'm thinking about that. And I got to think about turning pages. Once I start doing all of that, it's going to take me out of my zone. Me. It may not do that for you. You may still be okay. But for me, I don't like thinking about writing. I don't want to think about it. Okay. Even now, as I do this show, I'm just speaking. The lights are off. That's how I pretty much do all my shows. So all I'm focusing on is all of the energy out there of you who are listening. That's the only thing I'm focusing on right now. I'm not thinking about, I need to get the chat room open, because some people sometimes they like to chat, and I need to go on and put an announcement that I'm on the air right now. Nah, I'm just focusing on the main instrument that I have, and the main instrument that I have in this instance is my ability to astral project. I'm astral projecting my ideas and I'm receiving ideas from you all listening as I'm speaking. I'm right there with you. Okay. So when you're writing, you want to kind of break things down to that space. Okay. Just as a heads up. Now, something else that you want to keep in mind, which when you're writing, where I find that a lot of people, they miss out on, and I think it's a tough one. I remember I had to talk to a young child about this, who I love very dearly. And she's writing a book. She's still working on it. And, because of course I encourage, sure, you can write a book. You can do what I did. She said, oh, it's so amazing you write books. Nah, it's nothing. You can write a better book than I can. Trust me. So she's writing her book and I'm helping her. And I said, well, who's the book for? And she says, I want it for everybody. Now, an adult, I can easily say, man, you can't write it, but you better narrow it down to a target demographic. A child, you got to be a little soft about it. I was like, okay, well, that's cool. And, I said, okay, but, maybe you could do a series then, and each one you do in a series will be for different people. So you didn't want to that whole thing. But one of the challenges that I see people sometimes have is that they don't know how to focus on their target audience. Who's actually going to read this? And based on who's going to read it and who would be interested in it, how do you need to present what you're presenting so that they can understand it? Sometimes, especially when you're dealing with the spiritual community, there's this thought that the more mystical and ambiguous I am with my wording and things, the deeper and more spiritual I seem. So sometimes you'll just talk to someone and talking like a human. Then when you start getting into, a spiritual matter, all of a sudden this other voice comes out. It's very contrived one. Even other wording comes out. Well, I just thank the universe for the divine sweetness of my lovingness and my juicy nectar that flows from my syrupy bosom. It's like, you wasn't just talking like that. Just now you were talking like Samuel Jackson. Now all of a sudden you talking like Pepe Le Pew. That's not authentic. So what happens is it loses traction because it's not authentic. So that's something that you want to be mindful of when you're writing and when you're thinking about who I'm writing for. You'll be surprised. I'm telling you, for all you conscious community writers out there, those of you who want to write something for the community, I'm with you. Go on and do it. But you'll be surprised. People in that community actually prefer simpler language. I think I'm a testament to that. If you talk to anyone in my class or people who listen to my shows, the first thing they'll say is this: he makes it understandable. They all pretty much say the same thing. I mean, I'll get that he's deep and he's really smart and man, you're brilliant. But I get more of you really made it so I can understand it, man. Thank you so much. And that's usually what people thank me for. They don't thank me for too much else, but they thank me for explaining something to them in a way that they were able to get. So that right there is really powerful. And you'll notice that, and that's why sometimes you'll hear me pausing a little bit, or you'll hear those little ums in there, is because I'm doing my thinking. I think a lot when I talk, and I'm really making sure I'm not wording things in a way where I'm losing people. It's just so I can sound deep, because it's not hard to sound deep, especially when you read the type of books that I read. Most of the books that I read are pretty old. So because I read really old literature, the language is so archaic that it's easy to sound like an old magi if I just use the language from those books. But you don't really walk away with anything other than a different perspective of me. There's no value in that. So you want to keep that in mind even when you're writing. One of the easiest things you can do, and it will help you to really understand what you're saying when you're writing, write like you're speaking to 5-year-olds. That's how I write. And that's how I tend to speak. I try to. Like if I'm trying to disseminate this information to someone who's 5 years old. Okay. And that doesn't mean that certain things I won't speak on. It just means that I'll speak on it a certain way, or I may break it up. I still have a show on string theory I have to do. And that show has been a very interesting one for me. I haven't presented it yet, but it's been very interesting. I haven't been able to present it because I'm having so much trouble figuring out how to explain string theory to a 5-year-old. So I think I announced that show maybe like 2 months ago. Yeah, but I got to show it. We're working on it. Haven't done it yet, which has been fun because I enjoy the challenge. How can I break down? Because the people who talk about string theory don't even understand it. They're confused by it, because again, it's more theory than it is realized, but we've realized it in our traditions. So I already see with it, I'm going to have to employ a lot of mythology, you see. So again, it's a target audience that you want to kind of keep an eye on as you're creating, as you're writing, and more importantly, not so much with your concepts, but with how you present your concepts. That's really important. And all of these things we're speaking about before you even get to selling your work or publishing your work, or the desktop publishing aspects where you're doing the typesetting and you're designing book covers, and maybe even you might have to even get permission for some of the things that you have in your book and stuff like. We haven't even gotten to that. Okay. Now, one of the things that works well for certain people is setting deadlines. For this, I would really, if you're having trouble writing your book, I would really urge you to employ the techniques that I mentioned in the procrastination show. Okay, when I spoke about how to actually plan things out. With a book, I think it's even more critical that you set up workshop hours for your book. Okay, there should be hours where, you're committed to creative work, and there should be hours where you're committed to the brain dead stuff. Okay, and the brain dead stuff in writing a book may be your research, just looking things up, definitely sourcing your material if that's what you do. I don't source anything, me, myself. I don't do bibliographies, anything like that, because there's no rules. I write however I feel like writing. But I also don't quote anybody in my book. So I don't need to do that, or any of my books. And I probably never will. That's not really what I'm into. Just compiling a bunch of somebody else's information to give to you. You can do that for yourself, So whatever you have read in my books has come from me. But it's come from my experiences and my lessons and things like that, and my meditations. But it's most importantly came from all of the divine instructors and guides that have come to me in different forms throughout my life. Whether they were animals or whether they were people, whether they were meditations, whether they were visions. That's where everything I write and even what I say comes from. So I don't cite resources. I'll cite resources, and this is my feeling on it, when Tahuti cites his resources. Okay, so when you can get Tahuti and Set and Orumila to cite their resources, their sources, I know, of course, they'll say, well, Ifa. Okay. Well, where'd that come from? And where that came from, I have inside of me. So that's my take on that. But, everyone is different. So that's the time where you want to use for your brain dead stuff. And it may even be like, okay, what color do I want to cover? What font do I want to use? Font is important. You want to make sure you use a readable font. I've seen a lot of works before where people have focused on, especially their font work, they're focused on something that looks good to their eye, like on their computer screen. But you got to understand, unless you're doing an ebook, everything doesn't translate well on print that looks good on a computer screen. I've seen certain books written in papyrus font, which is like a little overused. I'm not gonna knock anybody who's used it in their book, because I don't want to make you feel bad or anything, or like I'm digging on you. But the thing is, fonts like that, because they're thin, they don't work well with typesetting. So you always want to stick to the standards like Arial, Gill Sans, Palatino, even the Roman, New Times Roman font, basic fonts. They may not look so cool when you're looking at them on your computer screen. Even Arabic font is a really good font to write in, but they look good when they're brought down small on book size. They're easy for printers to reproduce in a way where it's clear and it's coherent. So you always want to be careful about that as far as how you have your font typesetting set. And those are the things you do during your brain dead time, workshop hours, setting your margins. How am I going to do the margins from top to bottom, left to right, things like that. Maybe your spinal text, stuff like that. Okay. But the actual writing process is kind of more so what we're putting our focus on while we're talking. I'm just looking through some of the notes of some of the books that I have now and looking at how I've moved towards what I've done. Now, like I said, when I'm writing in terms of subject matter, one of the first things I think about is what's the need? What do we need? I don't just write because I just learned something. That's one of the problems I see with people sometimes. They learn something and then within like less than a month, they're writing something on it, or they want to teach a class on it. You got to be careful with that because you can hurt people that way. You gotta be really careful, because we live in a society where if people don't see things in a book, they don't believe it. But if they see it in a book, they believe it. I had somebody say that to me once. I was explaining some things about ancestors to her. She was a 7-day Adventist, is a 7-day Adventist, and a devout 7-day Adventist. Devout. She was, and she and I were very close at one time. And I think a lot of our closeness came just from the respect that we have for one another, because in our lanes, we were very devout. I'm a devout, African-centered warrior scholar, and she's a devout 7-day Adventist. So I was explaining something one day about how we perceive ancestors. We were sharing information back and forth. She was talking about Ellen White, if anyone's familiar with her in the 7-day Adventist scheme, and I was speaking about our perception of it, and she said, well, yeah, I hear this, but I need to see it in a book. You have to show me this in a book. And, I said, well, that's a little ridiculous, because I can just write a book saying the same thing, and then if I show it to you, you didn't believe it. And of course, she got a little quiet after that, but of course, the answer is yes. So that's something you want to kind of keep in mind when you're writing. There's a certain responsibility that comes with that. That's why that role of a sesh in ancient times, of course, where you get the archetype Seshat, or in the feminine form Seshatmas, that role of the sesh was a priesthood. That wasn't just, okay, I'm writing because I like writing and I'm sharing it with the world. No, when you wrote, there were certain initiations that you had to go through in order just to put things out, to share things with people. Okay. So it's critical that you take that responsibility very serious, that responsibility of writing, because you have some people in the world who still hold everything that's written as gospel. Okay. One of the things that you want to also do as you're writing is you want to determine your own measurements for success. That's really, 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 really important. You know, we're living in a time now of Lulu and Create Space, where it's very easy to put out your own material. So when people say I have a book out, it doesn't mean the same thing that it meant 15 years ago or 20 years ago, because, you know, they probably got published. Even if it was a small publishing house, that meant a thing. Just like when people say, now I'm going into the studio, probably going to somebody's bedroom, somebody's basement. You know, they got some little setup, you know, how to have your own home record like the pros, you know, little packet that they got from the music store, you know, for $300. And, you know, so it doesn't really mean the same thing that it once did, but that's also a good thing. You know, the home studio and the cheap recording technology, as well as, of course, file sharing sites, tore a hole through the record industry. And it was a hole that needed to be torn through the record industry, because it's a very wicked industry. Very wicked industry. And when the tablet came out, that tore a hole through the publishing industry, the book publishing. It crippled it. Because you mean I don't have to like figure out where to put my books anymore and dust them off and have all these bookshelves. I can just have this one device, and in this one device I can hold like 5,000 books. You know, it's a no-brainer. You got to think about, again, what do we need when you're writing? We're living in a time now of foreclosure. This is a foreclosure era. Everybody's losing their homes and they're having to downsize. So even the big screen TV, that used to be the big advertising, big screen TV. Nobody wants those things anymore. They don't have anywhere to put them. They want smaller and smaller devices. I want a phone that I can do everything. I want to watch movies on my phone. I want to use it as a computer, this, that, and that, because I don't have the space for all of that stuff anymore. That's the society that we're living in. So we need things smaller. Okay? So that's something you want to consider even when you're writing. If you're going to do paper format or digital format or a combination of them both. The truth is, the digital format works well, again, because people can store them on certain devices, and there are various digital formats. Okay, so it's not just one. I mean, you got EPUB, PDF, you got Mobi, of course, Kindle, you know, which is a popular one, you know, but there's a lot of digital formats. There's even more than that. You know, and then they have ones with DRM, which is digital rights management, where you know, if someone installs the file on one computer, they can't play it on another. It's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on. But the point is, when you pay attention to what's needed in your writing, this will help you. This is one of the reasons why I don't write extremely long books. People don't have time like they had before, and people, we live in a microwave society. I would love to write a 500-page epic saga. I mean, I'm working on one actually. So, but I don't. Again, the measurement of success is different. I don't expect that to come flying off the shelves, and it's okay. My measurement of success is actually completing it and being interested in it myself, being able to read it. That's my measurement. If I read my stuff back, I'm like, oh wow, this is interesting. You know, I've done that with some of my other works because I don't like to read them, but when I've glanced at them, I say, oh, this is interesting. One day I was coming down my steps. I was going somewhere, and I grabbed a copy of Solutions for Dysfunctional Family Relationships off my bookshelf. And I don't know why I started reading it, but I ended up sitting on the bottom of the steps with my coat on, and I couldn't put it down. I was like, this is really an interesting book. And I wrote it. But after I write them, I get it out. You see my whole freestyle flow process is gone. It's out of me. I move on to the next project. So sometimes I get to come back from a reader with a reader's perspective, which is enjoyable. And if I can read it and say, oh, this is nice, then I consider that to be a success. And we haven't even talked about sales yet, but that's what I consider to be a success for me. You know, but keep in mind too, your book is an opportunity for you to chronicle some of your not only your knowledge and your wisdom, but your life. You know, it's an opportunity so that when you leave here, you have a way to be not only remembered, but a way to be uplifted, because that book will always be here. You know, especially for those of you who have situations where you have children that you're estranged from. It's a very common thing now. You don't have good relationships with children ever. You can leave these memorials in the form of written works for your children, and they can come back and read them and see what you were really about. You know, see what you were really into and see what you were really thinking about. That's a very powerful thing that you certainly want to look into if you are in that situation. Now, you know what's interesting? I was going to do this segment, I was going to break down how we would write a book about Christopher, how do you pronounce it? Christovov or something like that. Christopher Cologne, which you know is Christopher Columbus. But we call him Christopher, but I think it was Cristoforo or Cristoval. Actually, his name was actually Cristoval. I know, I was trying to remember it. Cristobal Cologne. And I was going to break down some of that. But as you know, I really don't like to react all the time to different not pagan, but different holidays, and react all the time to different events that are going on. Because then it's like you're a slave to the stimulus that people drop into the water. So I try not to do that too much. I was going to say, okay, we were writing a book about how Christopher came to the Arawaks, and you know the Arawaks were the original inhabitants of Jamaica, the Arawak natives, who were completely slaughtered. They wiped all of them out. But when he came to the shores of the Bahamas, I think he landed October 12th, 1492. You know, and he saw the Tainos and the Arawaks and what was the other one? Lukayans natives who were actually speaking Hebrew. I was going to speak about what he did, how he took them back to his cabin, took some boys back to his cabin and had his way with them and stuff like that, and how we would write a work about that, right on the spot, how we would write a book about that. But maybe another show, you know. Maybe this wasn't a show to really speak about that too much, but just to give a couple more little hints and tips about how to write a book. Okay. And again, you see, we haven't even gotten into much of the mechanics, but just really, I'm giving you different things that you can utilize in order to maybe remove some of your writer's block. Okay. Which I'm gonna tell you, this is when you lack that flow mentality, because you're now demanding a perfect first draft from yourself. Okay, that's one of the things that causes that blockage. Or you're waiting to be inspired to write. Can't do that. You got to go out there and stimulate inspiration. That's how you write. Or sometimes you're trying to use a thesaurus to give you ideas. So you use a word and say, okay, this will help me to build from there. Okay. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. Don't be afraid with just piecing your works together. You know, don't be afraid to do that. There's nothing wrong with that when you're writing. And when you can't come up with a full idea, but you have just a little bit of an idea, it's okay to piece them together as you go. It's still coming from the same brain. It's okay, you know. But I know getting stuck in the middle of a work, in the middle of an idea, can be frustrating and annoying. But utilize some of the methods that I gave you. Remove the screens from you. Do a little bit of freestyle writing or freestyle thought form visualization, like I gave you. Like I said with the music, hum it out. So humming it out in your writing form, be visualizing it, and then turning your whole book or whatever you're writing into an affirmation. So speak it out. Okay, speak it out before you write anything. And of course, when you go to write, some of the words may change. It's okay. Don't worry about it. But speak it out first. All right. So I just want to let everybody know we're also doing a Black Friday sale. Sister Felicia is giving up the Life Path readings, 50% off. So you want to get on that. I see some people have already hit her up. They were right on it with it. And everyone who's come back from Life Path, I also help with those as well, because I give the old dues and the Orisha, the Guardian Orisha work on those. So there's a component in it for me as well, but she does the bulk of it. She does an excellent job, and she had a very good teacher. I'm not going to mention any names, but she had a really dashing, debonair, teacher that taught her how to do those Life Path readings, okay, and do them effectively. So you want to get on that. I think she's doing them today and tomorrow. 50% off. So, but you can put in your appointment now, and then you'll be in for whenever. You can make your appointment for whenever, but I think you got to set the appointment today and tomorrow, something like that. So, I figured I'd mention that to all of you who may not be aware of that. It's a good time to do it because we're coming on to a new Roman financial year. So now is the time to shore up, see what's going on with you, see what's been going on with you, and what the plan is going to be for the new Roman year coming. Of course, we have a lot of changes coming in the world of ANU. Some of you have already started seeing some of them, and there are many more to come. But in any event, I'll be back tomorrow with Foundational Friday, where I'll be talking about sex magic. All right. So, of course, that's not a show for the babies. All right. So you want to make sure that they're not in the room. I won't be speaking about anything too explicit, but, maybe you might want to listen to it first before you share it with them. Okay. So tomorrow, tune in for sex magic. And until then, this has been Thunderground Thursday, and I am Yuya. Thank you for listening. I will speak to you soon. Peace if you're ready to go to war for it.